Alright guys, it's Scrappy again. I hope you're doing well and enjoying your day. So far the teams have arrived on LAN, and what does that mean? Well, the big boys in large regard came to play in today's matchups. That did not necessarily mean there weren't serious upsets, especially to close out the day. FaZe, one of the key pre-tournament favourites, 3-0 slammed immediately down to the losers bracket. Very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Great to meet a handful of you guys at the venue as well today. I'll be there all weekend. It's been a great time so far. Firstly, COD Champs 2026 later this year in Vegas. This is the venue and the setup for that. Of course, what it looks like internally in terms of the Jumbotron and all that stuff, I guess time will tell, but that was officially unveiled today by the league. But let's talk about the games. Toronto versus Gentlemates. This, could it have been an upset potential? Sure. Neptune made some crazy plays during the game 4 to get them over the line. ReeaL had a particularly difficult map for this series. Look, Gentlemates play good COD, they play good aggressive COD, their hardpoint continues to be really good, their search and destroy has been pretty solid. It's why I picked them to win the tournament before we got started. They're still on a decent run to do that as of today, but it's still almost impossible to call. But Neptune was making some unreal plays. Great to see, Gataga having the setup, the OpTic boys having the setup, the Bush boys are in action as well tomorrow, certainly from the Challengers facility over there in the pit. That's going to be exciting. So many things that the scene has done over the last few years to make some small steps in the right direction, and the venue was pretty loud today, given it was a Thursday. There's plenty more people to get in there as the rest of the weekend goes on, and well, OpTic will certainly be playing on Saturday, based on the results of today, which of course is the day that they collect the rings, which was one of the talking points if they were to have lost today. The Gentlemates get the job done. Neptune says online or LAN, it does not matter. Great performance out of him. Envoy, they get the job done. And it was a 3-1 win. They lost the game 2 search, which was a little, not surprising, but just when they played online, it was actually Gentlemates that won both searches. This time they won both hardpoint and they won the exposure. I think that was what they lost online. They lost to like a dead overload, but this time they played them on exposure. They get the 5-3 victory there. Pretty hard fought map, but ReeaL and Inside have a difficult time, and that leaves ReeaL at a 0.6 for the series. Particularly rough time to drop a stat like this, just because there's all the talk about this roster, right? Bringing in ReeaL, was it going to be enough for the team? Was it a good idea? All these other things. And yeah, looks like Toronto continue their struggles from online, and if this continues going into the rest of the tournament, yeah, Toronto going into this year were considered to be probably one of the top teams. That does not look like the case as it stands. The next series, however, was the one that really I and many others were properly looking forward to. Ravens versus Thieves. Bit and needle between these teams online after their series. Of course, it was a Game 5, Round 11 that Ravens won. But again, this is why you just can't put too much stock into early season Stage 1 online qualifiers. LAN is always going to be a different story, and the reason why I had and many others had Thieves winning today is like, look, how many world championships have you got on that Thieves team? It's plenty, right? aBeZy's won twice, HyDra's won once, Scrap obviously 0 for now, but aBeZy, Kenny of course, 2-time world champion as well. So with all that in mind, and then you've got some guys on the Raven side of the stage that are playing their first LAN, right? This is a big deal. It shouldn't be a massive surprise that Thieves play some good stuff. I think, always a team that should get better on LAN, that Thieves roster. Kenny was talking with Don in a little interview we did after the fact and saying, look, he's happy with his own play. He thinks he's really good at this game. Like, he's certainly excited about playing the game. That's a positive thing for them. But also Ravens, it can sometimes be difficult to kind of play the same game. I think that was one of the talking points in this series, that it just didn't feel like quite the same aggressive, consistent trading. And you get that, right? Like, it shouldn't be a huge surprise that Ravens turn up to LAN. They just play a little bit more scared. The game slows down a little bit. Scrap stands up. He's talking all kinds of trash. And it was HyDra and Kenny. Those were the guys with the game 1 takeover. Exe was 17 and 30. Kenny had a great map. HyDra had a great map. Probably the two players under the most criticism, apart from Benjay, of course, given the aBeZy situation. But Thieves, all of those guys have been under the spotlight. But this is time to turn it around. And then aBeZy, after they went down 3-0, I mean, at the start of the map was definitely up in the air. But then Thieves, they brought it back. aBeZy goes like 14-3, and they get the map win without any question. And then the final map, they did go to another, maybe not surprising, but they went to a Scar Overload again. Of course, the map where they slammed them in that online series, 7-0. They pretty much slammed them again. So Thieves DoorDash Ravens straight out of the building, and Scrap had quite a few words to say about it. I talked with him briefly after the fact as well, and he said, you know, the kind of same thing that he said in the interview with Blaze. This is LAN now, baby. You ain't playing for your bedrooms anymore. This is where it gets serious. And I think Thieves going into this tournament definitely were in the conversation of, if they click, they can win this thing. They looked pretty good in the first round. I think it was definitely Thieves playing well. I think there was also a large part of it not being Ravens' best performance at all. Not similar really to what they were doing online. It may have been affected by the fact that they weren't able to properly practice yesterday. Exceed flew in late. That was unfortunate due to some of the cancellations. As Saint says, unfortunately, we weren't able to scrim yesterday. Confident we can make a losers run. But it's like, you know, how much difference does that really make? Is it an excuse? I think it's valid to an extent. But also, I don't really think that's the total reason why they lost today. And also, you kind of can't have it both ways. The team, Exceed was talking quite a bit before turning up to LAN. They're like, look, he was playing on 50 ping out of California. And the implication is that, well, get me to LAN, we should be even better. And other teams will not always agree with that assessment. They actually think that playing Ravens, because he's on that ping and the differences of where the teammates are based, might make it harder for their rivals. The reality is online COD is online COD. This is where, as I said at the start of the video, the big players really come to play. And Scrap had a few words on that after the series. Scrap's numbers, 1.02, which I'm pretty sure is exactly his season KD so far. But it wasn't really about Scrap. Yeah, he had decent damage again, but HyDra had a 1.4, aBeZy had a 1.25, Ken dropped to 1.2. Yeah, no doubts about the winner of this series so far. They will move on to play Gentlemates in the upper side of the bracket. So that should on paper be an absolute banger. I mean, yeah, great start to the tournament for the teams that were wondering, we were wondering after the online stint what they would look like, and that is certainly true for OpTic Texas. So they played Falcons today. And look, it's interesting with this Falcons team because the way that they started to play online, they looked like they were making lots of improvements. I had and still have, after this series, many doubts on this team. I was not very high on this Falcons team coming into the season. Thought it was a weird combination of players, thought their playstyles, wasn't really sure how it would work. But actually, after playing online in recent weeks, their search started to get really good. It looked like the energy with Xnid and Pred was really working out. But obviously LAN is a different story, right? And Xnid, this is a huge series for him. You know, he's properly integrated into the Falcons now, playing against OpTic, home crowd, home major, all that type of stuff. The energy in the room, given it was a Thursday, it was pretty energetic in there, to say the least. And Xnid has a rough series, and as a result, what you see on the map for the Falcons was certainly not what we were seeing in the online stint. It's not like they don't still have the potential to play in that way, but the kind of concerns about what this team could look like, basically the way that they played today, was kind of the worst case scenario for how this Falcons team could look. I mean, the overload was just pretty embarrassing. They lose the game one. Shotzzy was one of the other key talking points. He started out game one 3-10. It was like 70-70, right? Tight game. But then Shotzzy turned it up. He actually said to me after the series that he had Pred on. Basically, he had Pred's number the whole time, and he knows how he plays. There was no real doubt that on LAN, after the discussion on Shotzzy's slow start to the season online, on LAN a very different story. They go 2-0 up as well after a pretty comprehensive search and destroy win. And it was the control or the overload to me that kind of turned heads really, because Falcons, the early part of this map was pretty competitive and they just didn't play particularly confidently, didn't play particularly aggressively. They let OpTic take the reins of the map and eventually the series. And look, when you go 3-1 down, you can't park the bus or else you're going to lose the map. And that's unfortunately something that Falcons learned the hard way today. So, like, Octane talks pretty negatively about their play and says that was the worst mini-map performances, or one of the worst mini-map performances that I've seen this year. So, yeah, an absolute disaster from top to bottom. But Karma saw this coming, right? I think most of us had seen Falcons' progression in recent weeks and said, okay, they could be a threat in this series. I thought it was pretty much a 50-50 series, to be honest. But OpTic, maybe Mercules inspired, I don't know. Not like Merc was super the standout of this series. That was probably Shotzzy. Merc did have some moments though, for sure. But Mercules on LAN, this team on LAN in general, this OpTic roster, they continue to be a serious force. So maybe it's not too much of a surprise. They advance in the brackets. Karma clearly knows a thing or two about how Falcons have played online in recent weeks. He says those guys are terrible, my God. Hope you guys weren't worried. So, yeah, OpTic clearly had a lot of confidence. They were getting the job done there. Actually, yeah, this was the little sit-down we had with Shotzzy after the fact. This is kind of the setup, right? So top of the venue here. These are like where the booths are, where the watch parties are and stuff. They've got a few of these nice little booths. And yeah, a few words with Shotzzy. And he said, yeah, had AG's number that series. Dashy, good start to LAN, 3-0. GG's to the Falcons. Even the COD League put out a video roasting the Falcons, which I thought was pretty interesting. But we've definitely seen that before on occasion. And Shotzzy said, look, fans, online COD, it is what it is. But we're on LAN, trust me, we got it. I actually asked him in an interview about Karma's comments, so they were looking really good online. And he said, yeah, that's true, we're kind of frying in scrims. But LAN is, once again, it seems a different story to what things look like online in recent weeks. Shout out Syrup as well for a nice little shot right here. The overall numbers, Dashy with a 1.1, Merc with a 1.3, Shotzzy with a 1.23. Again, you know, it's tough to argue against Mercules. X another 0.7. But Shotzzy finally turned up today. I think that was one of the key talking points. However, after those three series went in the way of the favourites, right? Like we expected those teams to win. It felt like there was an upset today. I didn't see it against Gentlemates. I didn't see it against Thieves. I thought that it was possibly, if there was going to be one, against OpTic. But the final series, of course, was always a question as well, because G2 beat them online. However, many people, including myself, thought, okay, FaZe, they're going to do a better job here. But I did have a bit more confidence in G2 than I did about, let's say, Ravens or something. Because G2, they've got plenty of experience. Sky is world champion on that roster, right? So they've got a number of quality players, and they beat FaZe online. Kremp actually said to me before the series started, and I was like, okay, this is going to get interesting, because Kremp mentioned that, well, you know, there's all this talk about Colossus and playing it against us, but the reason why they play us on Colossus is because it's not our best map. But, of course, given all the talk about Kremplossus, they didn't want to play it in this series, so that's what happens. They ended up on Blackheart map 1, and G2 get the job done with an absolute Skies takeover. Not probably the player on Blackheart that you would have expected to pop takeover, but that's what he does. FaZe get shell-shocked to a certain extent map 1, and this was one of the key questions. We talked about it on the pre-show today, like, how bad would FaZe have to do in order to think about, well, is this the right roster, right? Like, obviously, Luka's down there on the bench and all this. Like, it's early days to discuss it, but they lost 3-1 online, and today was even worse, right? Map 1 was close, but was far from an absolute 250-249. The game 2 was really not close at all. The G2 just handled business very comfortably. Drazah and 04 both had horrible maps. Of course, arguably two of the players under the most spotlight. Simp tried his best, but it wasn't good enough. And the game 3 was actually just awful. Like, FaZe went up here, and it looked like, okay, they were up like 3-1, 5-3, whatever. They probably close this one out, they go through, and we get them at 4, and it's a series on our hands, right? But no, FaZe, look, this is why Park the Bus is a strategy. Had FaZe backed up to spawn and parked the bus, they might well have walked away with a very different series result here. But no, they decided to stick to it, stick to the game plan, and then they full collapsed, and they absolutely collapsed at the end of this map. Like, they could not buy a kill. G2 are running their world, and G2 have got an awful lot of confidence, right? Like, I think Kremp is such a great character, always a fun guy to kind of root for. It doesn't matter who there's playing, Kremp will have immense confidence, and it looks like Mumba's the same way. I mean, look at him go, right? Like, he's absolutely talking all kinds of trash on these boys. Skies, we know what he does. And then ReeaL, pretty quiet guy on some level, but also an absolute shooter, right? So, look, they've put together a very interesting roster, G2. Early season, there was optimism about them. They looked good in that Monster Invitational. Then they turned up to the ReeaL season, looked a bit shaken. It's like, oh, well, here we go again. It's another one of these Minnesota rosters that doesn't really do that much. They go to Game 5 every series. They don't win anything. But no, this looks like a different iteration. And look, whether FaZe underestimated them or whatever, you can question that. But the Game 3 was just an especially bad way to lose, and it will leave a real bitter taste, I think, in their mouths, right? Because FaZe, it's not just like you've lost, but you've lost in a fashion which was particularly painful. Estriel 1.2, Kremp 1.2, Skies 1.2, job done. G2 move on, and Shotzzy said that when I talked to him, he was like, look, I think that he said he wanted to play FaZe because it would have been a good series, but he said he could easily see G2 winning that one. Based on scrims, clearly, that OpTic have played, G2 and FaZe both looking similarly good, and G2 clearly a force to be reckoned with for the rest of the tournament as well. So, yes, this is how the bracket currently stands. Probably not the one that we thought was going to happen after day one, but intrigued to your thoughts, as always, in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.